Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Comic Book Users. Welcome to another episode of the show. We got a pretty special one for you here. We've got on the Zoom line, longtime viewer of both Comic Book Users and Sea of Tranquility, Mr. Larrry Wilson, also from New York. He's a bit more upstate from me. He's a big comic book fan, but more importantly, the reason why he's here today is he is a comic art print collector, and he's got a substantial collection that he's been kind of sharing with me online, and I figure it'd be a good time to get him on the show, especially this week because Bill and I aren't getting together this week, so I actually do need some serious content, and Larry's here to save the day, which is great. So Larry, welcome to the show. It's good to meet you virtually for the first time.
Like this, Pete. It's a pleasure.
There you go. So Larry had shared a link to Comic Art Fans, which is a website where he has a lot of the prints that he's collected over the years up, and he asked me to kind of take a look through them and see which ones I might be interested in having him show off. And we're also going to attempt to do a screen share here for the first time on Comic Book Users, and I'll pull up some of these from the website you can see a full screen picture. But Larry, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, when you started collecting comics and when you started collecting prints and all that good stuff?
Well, you and I are roughly the same age, so I love Comic Book Geezers because you're talking about comics that I read, the very ones. So I started probably like most kids when I was probably 9, 10 years old, something like that. So everything that you read when you're 11, 12, 13, those are the classics. Nobody can talk you out of those being the best ever. So I started then, so that would have been, I remember when comics were 20 cents.
Okay.
Most of what I bought was probably 25 cents, and I got a 25-cent allowance, every week when I got it. So, that's what I saved up for. So that was probably 1975, 6 when I really started collecting.
And how hard was it? Because I remember, and I started collecting, I think, a little bit younger than you. I got the bug really early. I think I was like 3 or 4 or something like
wow.
that. But how hard was it when you only had like maybe 50 cents in your pocket? That's all you had, and you go down to the to the newsstand or the stationery store, and let's be frank, back in the day when you went to the store, you didn't have just 3 or 4 comics to choose from. You had like 10, 15, 20. Everything was there every week, and you had to choose 2. If you were lucky, maybe 3, maybe your dad or mom would give you that extra 15, 20 cents or whatever, but for the most part you had to really pick and choose. I mean, that was pretty difficult.
And not only that, I mean, we were like, when I first started, when I was maybe 8 years old, we were slaves to our parents driving us to these places.
Yeah.
The newsstands, the drugstores. Finally I got a bike, and I could bike to one particular drugstore. But you got to remember too, back then, let's say you were a big fan of whatever, the Avengers or Batman or Captain America. You went to that drugstore and you got this month's issue, if you could afford it in your budget, like you said, because you had to choose between the ones. If you were an Avengers fan, in other words, you wanted to get Thor, and you wanted to get Iron Man, and you wanted to get Captain America. If you're a Justice League fan, you wanted to get Superman and Batman and Green Lantern, and you just couldn't, to illustrate your point. But then when you did, let's say I bought that issue of Avengers, and with it, I bought that Captain America. You had no idea if the drugstore or newsstand was going to carry the next month's issue. This was before back issues in comic book stores. You just had no idea how or if you were ever going to get that comic. My favorite comic of all time, it took me probably, I'm not kidding, 15 years to read the second part of it.
Wow. Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. And you bring up a great point, because I had a friend when I was growing up who we met on the same bus route, but we lived probably 4 or 5 miles away from each other. So we each had different places that we went to get our comics. I went to a place in Goshen, New York, and he went to a place, and they were both like newsstands, and it was in, I think, New Hampton, New York. So again, like one town over, but with a few miles in between. And every week, we would meet on the bus, like on Monday, and we would show off the comics that we bought over the weekend. And we almost never bought the same ones, because his place always had different comics than what mine had. It was crazy.
Nuts. It was nuts. We did that at summer camp. We sort of traded the comics, like, oh my God, I've been looking for that one forever. And my friend John had this one, or Dave had that one. And we would share them that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, those were the days. They really were. Between trying to get to the places and trying to afford it, even though they were only a quarter, inflation being what it is, that was a lot.
Yeah. And now we go online and are like, okay, there's 30 comics that I want to get, $400. Okay, am I going to spend that?
That's your other show, your addiction show.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's totally. That's why I don't buy too often anymore, because I know when I do, it's very hard for me to just go online to my favorite online vendor and just order, a couple issues. I make it worthwhile, right? So I'm going to order like 20 or whatever. Or if I go to a convention or something like that, I don't just go in and buy 1 or 2 books. I go and I buy. I've walked out of cons and come home with like 150 comics. It's totally, the curse is totally real. So Larry, when did you start buying prints? Because that's also a curse too. Just like, because I don't have a lot, but I do have some. And yeah, it's, for me, it's just I just don't have any place to put them. So that was why I don't.
I never entertained the thought of buying the artwork. The comics were enough. I didn't even know it was a thing to do. And for much of my life, it really kind of wasn't a thing to do. It was a throwaway thing to do. Original art had sort of a Jekyll and Hyde, almost said Heckle and Jekyll, a Jekyll and Hyde relationship with the comic book companies. On one hand, they didn't think too much of it. If you wrote a good letter to DC or to Marvel, they might send you a piece of original art for nothing, just because you wrote a nice letter. If you went to a convention or had an artist sign something for you, they might just hand you a piece of original art, like a business card, something like that. On the other hand, the comic book companies also hoarded a lot of the art and wouldn't give it to the artist. They felt it was their possession, not the artist's possession. So while on one hand they were giving it away if you got kind of lucky, on the other hand they were very guarded, particularly as time went on and they started holding on to these things. That's when they sort of became a collector's item. My life story is probably not unlike a lot of people's life stories. I as a writer, I was inspired by Stan Lee and Roy Thomas and Denny O'Neil and so many others. And so I just started to dig a little deeper. And, how there is such a thing as this original art. Boy, it would be nice to have. And so I got into writing, and then I got into a business. I was part of a nationwide retailer that brought animation cells and original comic art to the public in malls and shopping centers and things like that. So I started to acquire a lot of art. And back then, a lot of it, you couldn't give it away. I mean, you'd buy something that now will sell at auction for $10,000. And back then, if you bought it for $200, people thought you were nuts. But, as a retailer, I started to acquire a lot, but I also started to sell a lot because you got to turn the lights on and pay the bills and payroll and things like that. So I've gone through a lot of art. I hardly have anything that, that I used to have, you might say, but I've been able to hang on to quite a few pieces that make me happy because they were from maybe some of my favorite comics. And that's really what it's all about. I haven't been a retailer in decades, and I've just been a collector since. And I'm really happy to have what I've got.
Cool. So I want to get us started here and showing off a few of these things. So I'm going to do a screen share here. And Larry, just let me know if you can see.
Yep, there we go.
There we go. So this is, Larry asked me to pick out a few things that I really liked. And as most people know, I'm a huge Doc Savage fan.
We share that.
I have almost every single Doc Savage novel. In fact, I think I pretty much have them all. And I'm also a big fan of Bob Larkin. And this is an incredible work here. It's funny because I was showing my wife this before, and she goes, "Well, I see a werewolf, some chick with a gun, and some guy with his shirt ripped open." And I was like, "Well, that's Doc Savage." She goes, "I thought he was a blonde," and I'm like, "Well, he kind of is, but you know, the most famous interpretation of Doc Savage, he's got the really close cut skull cap type of thing, and this is." I mean, this is Doc Savage, right? I mean, it's a perfect rendition here. So when did you acquire this one? So it looks like it says 20, is that 16? Is that what that says? I really can't read the date.
That's an original painting by Bob Larkin, who, you know, was one of the big three. You know, Walter Baumhofer was the Doc Savage artist back in the pulp days, in the 30s and such. And then, of course, James Bama brought Doc Savage to life in all of the Bantam paperbacks that you were just talking about. But Bob Larkin is the third master who brought Doc into the sort of modern day.
Yep.
There's a funny story about this, and this original painting hangs in this very room I'm sitting in right here.
Oh, nice.
The werewolf isn't just any werewolf.
That's Lon Chaney Jr. right there. Yeah.
Right. I'm a Universal Monsters maniac like you, and it just happens to be the werewolf. The woman in the front, who is Pat Savage, Doc Savage's cousin, was modeled after a friend of Bob Larkin's then wife.
Oh, okay.
That's why she doesn't look exactly like Pat Savage.
Right.
And matter of fact, that, if you can see this, is the original art to this book right here, which comes out every few months. The Bronze Gazette, which is like a fan book, you know, that publishes stories about Doc every few months, 4 times a year. It's a great book, by the way. Great magazine.
Yeah, I love everything Doc Savage. I have all the Marvel black and whites. I have the full DC run, which was sometime in the 2000s. I forget exactly when that happened. And I've got all the original Marvel comics, the color comics, and yeah, I'm just Doc Savage nut. In fact, I'm reading one right now. It's like, you know, it's just Doc Savage has been a part of my life, like my entire life. So I saw that, and that instantly.
I was hoping you'd pick that, and I thought you might pick this too. I have the original art in a different room upstairs.
Yeah.
Because this has got, you know, Batman with a gun on it, and everybody goes ooh ah, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I love Doc too. Doc's just the best.
Yeah. All right, so let's share another one here. Let's go. So here we've got Shang-Chi as drawn by Neil Adams.
Yep, I've got that right here.
Nice.
That Neil Adams has a web show, you know, on the internet, where he comes out with his family and he draws and he sells commissions and things like that. And when it was announced that the Shang-Chi movie was coming out, I remembered a few really great covers in the magazines that like Deadly Hands of Kung Fu that Neil Adams did. And I thought it might be fun to ask Neil to do a Shang-Chi, and that's what he did.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Wow.
Yeah, not too shabby. You know?
So to my recollection, he never did any interiors on a Master of Kung Fu or Shang-Chi book, correct?
No, to my recollection, he might have helped out, like whenever they did the Krusty Bunkers, he might have inked a page or something here and there, but I'm not even sure of that.
Yeah, I don't recall. I mean, you know, obviously the character created originally drawn by Jim Starlin, and then lots of different artists worked on that comic over the years. None better than Paul Gulacy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He was the absolute best at doing that character, I thought.
Yeah, Zek was good. Gene Day was fantastic.
Yeah, true.
But Gulacy really set the tone.
Yeah, big time. All right, let's see what we got next here. How about a little George Tuska?
Yeah, that's a nice, interesting piece. So like there's different categories of original art. There's the original art that's published, like the cover in Doc Savage. There is the commission, like the Shang-Chi we just looked at.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you get something like this. This is a book, The Art of George Tuska.
Oh, nice.
And I know the author pretty well. And he hooked me up with that. That drawing is on the inside cover.
Wow. I'm a big fan. I think George Tuska was one of the most underrated artists for Marvel in the 70s. And I always loved his interpretation of Iron Man. I thought he was great on Luke Cage. And I saw this Thor and I was like, man, it's like almost like a missed opportunity. Because can you imagine if he worked on the Thor comic for a while, like maybe, after John Buscema at some point, like right around there, maybe later in the decade or something. Because, I mean, with Thor, it was hard because you had Kirby worked on it for so long, and then Johnny worked on it for so long. Then you had Keith Pollard and all these other guys. But I would have loved to have seen Tuska, based on this, to seen Tuska work on it a little bit.
Yeah, Tuska's raw pencils, uninked by anyone else. I mean, that's very powerful stuff.
Yeah. It's really, really good.
And it's funny you mentioned Power Man, because his run on Power Man was one of the first runs that I was able to collect, as a kid. Love that run on Power Man.
Yeah, I'll go on record as saying, as kind of cool as the Heroes for Hire with him and Luke and Iron Fist was, I think the best Luke Cage was the original Hero for Hire and early Power Man stuff. So in other words, the first like maybe 35, 40 issues of Luke Cage before, right? I mean, and it's not like I think when it comes down to, the art was really bad after they joined together. It was still pretty good, like in the early 50s, because the first issue was with 50, and then the next couple after that. But man, you go look at some of those issues in like the 60s, 70s, and 80s, not that good. The art is not that good. Whereas early on in Luke Cage's, comic book career, man, the artwork was spectacular on a lot of that early stuff.
George Tuska had that Kirby dynamism, where everything looked 3D.
Yeah.
And it was very cliched 70s stuff, in Luke Cage.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally.
But that just made it so much more fun. The later stuff, both art and tone, I think, was more homogenized. You're right.
Yeah, yeah. And, as weird as it is now to look back on it, because of like the way the world is today. I mean, that early 70s stuff, the Luke Cage comic was the stereotypes was the blaxploitation. It was just utterly ridiculous when you look back on it now. But those are the times. And it's kind of charming to look back on that stuff now. Granted, that would never go over today. And like Bill and I did an episode, I don't know, like a month or two ago, where we, we do these villain episodes, and we did Black Mariah, who was one of, Luke's big villains, kind of like the female black version of the Kingpin in Harlem. And, we were like showing stuff in the comic and reading some of the lines, and like a couple of viewers got a little upset, like, why are you guys reading that stuff? It's like, well, but that's the way it was back then. It's like, I get it today, you wouldn't do something like that, but there's a certain charm about it, You
have to present it like it was presented. Revisionist history robs a whole generation of how great that stuff was.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So from there, we're going to go to have a little Batman.
Now, you brought up going to a newsstand when you were a kid.
Yes.
We had a big newsstand called Central News on Central Avenue in Albany. And when you'd walk in as a kid, you would see it towered over you. They had this gigantic like bookcase. And on the top were the stuff you couldn't reach. It was like the Frank Frazetta, Bob Larkin magazines, Mature, and stuff like that. And those guys were like gods. That's probably why we like Larkin so much,
Yeah.
And then there were the comic books, the stuff you could reach. But then on the floor, because they were so big, they wouldn't fit in the comic book stuff. On the floor, you had your treasury editions.
Oh, yeah.
Was there ever a better feeling than seeing those treasury editions come in? Oh my God, that was unbelievable. And again, how do you afford those? You really, really had to beg, borrow, and steal to get those. But this treasury edition, this is my original from 1976, very well read, has a cover that I've just always loved. It was designed by Carmen Infantino and painted by a guy named Wally Fax, who did like no other comic book work, zero. but he and Infantino were friends, and there's no way you can acquire that original art. It's lost forever or deep inside someone's collection. Who knows where it is. So I had a fella named John Watson, who is an amazing painter in Europe, do this recreation, and it's just incredible.
It's really nice.
It's spot on, perfect.
I mean, just look at that. Great colors.
That's done in oils, I believe.
Wow. Very cool. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Isn't that something? I mean, us men of a certain age, that's Batman.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. All right, from Batman, we'll go to
Adams, Irv Novick Batman.
Yeah, very true. All right, so here we got John Herbert doing a little Avengers.
Yeah, John is also a local guy. He lives up here, upstate. An amazing talent, an incredible comic book artist. Did some well-known issues of Punisher, did an X-Men series, and John's actually a personal friend. And Avengers 15 is the book that started it all for me. I used to go to a barber shop with my dad, and they had a beat up old copy of Avengers 15. Avengers 15 came out in 65. So I was only 1 year old, but that comic was in there in that barbershop all those years. And they only had like 2 comics in the whole place. So that's what I would read when I went there. And that's the one where I never got Avengers 16 to see what happened, the conclusion of the battle, for like another 15 years. There were no comic book stores, no nothing. There was no way to get it. So I asked John to do a commission, and this one's also hanging in this room, of that comic. Now, this is what you would call a I don't know what they would say. That he used or multimedia is what they would call this. It's paint, it's watercolors, it's pen and ink and pencil, and he also did it on layers. The photo doesn't do it justice. There's like a celluloid layer, and then there's a layer with the figures, and then a layer with the backgrounds. It's my all-time favorite comic. It's just everything to me, this comic book.
Yeah, I don't own this particular one, but I've always loved this cover. I mean, this is classic of early Avengers, right? You had like the good guys and the bad guys, or the 2 warring sides getting ready to go at it. So here you've got, Giant Man, Thor, Iron Man, the Wasp, and Cap, and it looks like Executioner, Enchantress, Black Knight, Baron Zemo. Who's the guy right between Baron Zemo and the Black Knight?
That's the Melter.
The Melter. Okay, yeah, there you go. It's early villain. That's right. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, that's good. Great colors on this too.
Masters of Evil. And you're right to point out the cover with the 2 sides going against each other.
Yeah.
I've long maintained that, and the original, of course, was Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
The cover. I've long maintained that was the first cover of both teams on each side.
I think you are right. Yeah.
They've done it many times.
There was a lot that came after it.
Yeah, X-Men 100, Avengers Annual 1. There's a ton. You're right, but I believe that was the first.
Yeah, I think you're right. Very cool. All right, last but not least, let's look at another one here. I had to pick this one just because I love both of these guys so much. This really has nothing to do with comics at all, but everybody knows, especially if you watch me on the Monsters Den on Sea of Tranquility, Abbott and Costello, Me Frankenstein is probably my favorite movie of all time. I love Bela Lugosi to death. I love Lou Costello, and here they both are, just amazing.
This one has a history too. Believe it or not, this is also a published piece. This is a piece of art that's in a book. An artist named Mike DiCarlo was doing a book, and to finance the book, he was selling original art pages from the book.
Wow.
So when I heard about that, I just had to have it, because as we talked about, it's Bella, it's a Universal monster. It's my favorite movie ever. And it's just a brilliant work. It really is. The caricature is incredible.
Yeah, it's spot on. Yeah, I have seen Abbott and Costello, Me Frankenstein more than any other film ever.
Yeah.
And I watch it every year, at least twice a year religiously. And I have since probably I was like 3 or 4 years old.
if I could keep track of how many times I've seen movies, it's a mad, 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 mad world, Godzilla and King Kong, and I
Yeah.
think this one beats both of those.
Yeah, it's easily my number one. Yeah, but yeah, the first King Kong, Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla, King Kong versus Godzilla, the first Godzilla. I mean, just there's certain movies that I just watch over and over and over and over and over again. It's like you never get tired of them. So all the stuff that's on this particular website is you are selling some of these too, correct? Or
I do occasionally sell things. Matter of fact, this weekend I sold 2 pieces, which is highly unusual, but I did. Um, you know, sometimes the market just dictates it's time to sell something, or maybe you want to sell something in order to afford to buy something else.
sure, yeah,
Um, it doesn't mean you don't love it. It doesn't mean you're not a collector, an enthusiast. It just means, you're really kind of only a caretaker of the art for as long as you can be. Those 2 pieces, one of them I had for pushing 20 years, and the other one was at least 10. And it was time. It was time. And
got to do
you
what you
still
got.
love the book, you still have the comics.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then someday those will eventually go, right? I mean, that's the way it goes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always think when you're a collector of stuff, when it does come time where you have to part with something, myself personally, I just want to make sure it goes to a good home that will appreciate it like I have done for however many years, whether it's comic books or, guitars or movies or CDs, whatever it is. It's like I can't keep it anymore, but I want someone else to get the enjoyment out of having it like I have, right? So
You don't always have the luxury of directing where your stuff goes, but when you do and you find a good home for it, it really means a lot. I know it sounds corny, but it really does.
not at all. Yeah, not at all.
There's a couple pieces I wanted to show you
Cool.
for different reasons. Excuse my back. This is what it's all about. If you can see this, this is my favorite page from my favorite comic book ever. There's only 4 pages that I know of that survive from 1965's Avengers 15. And this is laid out by Jack Kirby, drawn by Don Heck, who is one of my favorite ever artists. He and Tuska are 1A, 1B as far as Iron Man artists go.
Yep.
And inked by Mike Esposito. And when you get a page from that comic, V1, it's incredible. Another one I loved, and I'm illustrating this. This is a page from an artist that I know you love as well, John Buscema.
Yep.
This is the final page of Avengers 84. Now, this was just a few years later. This was, I think, 1971. And you can see the gigantic size difference.
Yeah.
The artists used to have the luxury of working on what they used to call twice up. And then to save money, they had to do this, which is still, it's 11 by 17.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Depending on who you are artistically, it's a lot less space to own your craft.
Yeah.
It's an amazing difference. And a lot of the old time collectors really value the twice up stuff over the newer stuff. But newer, I mean, 1971, and we're still saying newer. Another piece that I thought you might like is this. Now, this is a storyboard. It's a storyboard by a great all-time artist named Alex Toth. And it's from Super Friends. Now, when we were kids, pretty much all we had was Super Friends. I mean, you occasionally had a Batman cartoon or a Lone Ranger cartoon or something, but Super Friends, that was about it. If you love comics, all you could watch really was Super Friends. Space Ghost was a little before our time, believe it or not, and it was all Super Friends. And the crazy thing about this is, look how dynamic and dramatic this is compared to the camp that we got on Super Friends.
Yeah, Super Friends is actually, when looking back on it, was pretty. We loved it, but it was pretty bad.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
But somehow it translated from that dramatic stuff to what we got. I don't know how that is. So I just thought that, I think that's one of the more unique things you'll ever find.
Yeah,
It's
that's pretty wild.
cool. Yeah. And that's all I got.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, Larry. I really appreciate it. This was fun. Comic art is just it's a lost art in my opinion, because as much as I try to appreciate the stuff of today, a lot of it just doesn't hit me like the old stuff does.
It doesn't. We talked about it with Tuska, that there was the art of storytelling.
Yeah.
Where they could even make conversations seem dramatic. Now, if there's a conversation in a comic, it's one talking head and another talking head. And then if there's an action page, it's like they're drawing the cover all over again. There's no choreography to it.
Yeah.
I don't want to say everybody, but you're right. In general, I hate to sound like an old guy, but it was better back then.
Well, I mean, you buy a new comic nowadays, you're spending $4 or $5 for it. You take it home, and in 3 minutes, you're done with it. Whereas in the old days, or today, if I go to grab, this, and I go to sit down to read it, I'm reading it for 15, 20 minutes, because that's how much storyline is in there, dialogue and everything else. And that's what I look for. And I just, quite frankly, a lot of what's out today, I don't really get that from. So, and plus, who can afford to buy 8, 10, 12 issues a week, or more, a month, even a month. It's like you add up the cost of it. It's crazy. It's crazy.
It's nuts. I mean, most of my new buys are reprints of the old stuff.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So cool. So what I'll do is in the comments of the video below, I'll drop a link to the website, so folks can go on and check out all these great prints that Larry's got. How many in total do you have up there? It's quite a few.
Oh God, I don't know. I don't even know, and that's not even all I have. That's what's up there. I've got a few hundred pieces of original art on there. Yeah, probably a few hundred.
Cool. All right, so we'll put that link up down below.
And I'm very small potatoes too compared to other guys that are out there. Oh my God!
I can imagine.
When you go to that site and you start looking around, it's like, oh, someone owns that. It's incredible.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, thanks again, Larry, for hopping on with us here. We really appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions for Larry directly, again, put them down in the comments below. I'll make sure Larry goes and checks those out, and he can answer any questions you might have. So thanks for watching, everybody. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and click on that little notification bell down below, because when you do that, you get alerted every time we post some content. So for Larry Wilson, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you again in a couple of days with more stuff here on Comic Book Geezers. Till then, have a good one, everybody. Take care.